Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transfer Show here on Anfield Index. I'm Trev Downey, podcasting to you from my home here in beautiful rural Ireland. I'm joined, of course, by our transfer guru, Mr. Dave Davis. How are you, sir?
All right. There's worse things in the world, don't get me wrong, but probably a bit like you. I think we discussed it before we went live. There's almost transfer fatigue with certain sagas or what's becoming a saga just setting in. And probably for the many who are watching, we are the same as you. Like, will someone just get on with what we want them to get on with, basically?
I've realised I'm not a fan of sagas. That's what I've realised. It's taken me some time to realise it, but I really don't like it. I don't have the patience for it. And I love when we go and hit hard and hit quick and get a job done. But you know what? We've persevered with a couple of sagas this summer so far, and it's been worthwhile. We'll see whether the big one that's currently on everyone's mind pans out. Some wrinkles today, Dave. Some wrinkles today, my friend, which have definitely thrown a few spanners in the work. But we'll start with Liverpool news as we always do. And as we know, if we are to fund some of these big signings that we still need to make in the centre half department, and theoretically, at least up top, someone will have to go. People will still have to leave. We'll go and probably finish the show with the biggest of our exit stories, but let's start with some of the smaller ones and the confirmation of Tyler Morton's departure, his medical, his signing, all of this, I think, is pretty much done. There's some interesting details about the sell-on clause, about the fee that I know you have for us. I think I read something via Paul Joyce today that confirmed some of those details as well. But it's not just Tyler Morton. There's also Ben Doak, who showed well, I thought, last night and did himself no harm whatsoever. Whether it's enough to keep him around Anfield or not is another thing. And then there's McConnell, who we were told was one that was certainly a preferred option for Arne Slot to keep around. So a loan more likely there. And then there's Jaden Dan. So let's walk ourselves through all of those with the big story first, that being Tyler Morton, who's coming in for, or who's heading off for some decent money for the Reds.
Totally. It feels like, and we kind of saw this a little bit last night. There's a golden boy pairing for us, isn't it? It's Rio and Gamoa and Trey Ione. Those are the two startlets, the one that obviously that Arne Slot's going to work with. But in a shame, in a sense, but it was always coming. Tyler Morton, I mean, it could even be announced as we hear right now, couldn't we? We're just waiting for that announcement that Tyler Morton's completed that move to Lyon for up to £15 million. And as you said, that 20% sell-on clause, which isn't a shabby deal for a player that, really didn't play a single minute, hardly did he, last season. So, yeah, a smart move, a good move for the player that way as well. So that is one set to be confirmed out the door. You're right, Ben Doak, I mean, he scored last night. I don't really think he did himself any harm, but maybe didn't do himself any harm in the shop window. We chatted about it with David Lynch earlier. Still major interest. Wolves, West Ham, quite a few teams have inquired. It's just about, are those teams going to put up the money that Liverpool are looking for, at least 20 million quid? And you'd probably suspect it's one of those where they do a deal for somewhere just a little bit north of 20 million, sell-on clause, again in there, that type of thing will get it done. But I like Ben Doak. It's just hard to see a future, isn't it, at Anfield, realistically, in that regard. So we're awaiting developments on that. McConnell, like you said, just waiting for him to sign a new deal and ship on, realistically, on loan, like the standard loan operations that Liverpool do. Jaden Dan's expected to go out on loan as well. It does feel like we've had their Anfield friendlies, and it always tends to be a marker in the transfer window for the kids, doesn't it? Are they young starlets? Have they got a real chance? If not, off they depart on loan or they stay with the first team squad. And there's nothing wrong with saying this. Rio and Trey are just an unbelievable potential level, aren't they? They really are. They are a bit head and shoulders above the rest. There's nothing wrong with saying that. It's right to be excited about those two players. The rest, a low move, departures, whether it's permanent or not, just seems right for them all. So even if this goes late in a window, I think we'll see a raft of them just departing one by one.
Can I ask you, seeing as it is just the evening after, what you made of the youngsters who did have a showing yesterday evening? Because an awful lot of people will be thinking of Rio and Gamoa. People will be thinking about Triniani, particularly those two, and asking themselves questions about whether it's the right thing to do to keep them around the squad. Now, I heard you talk to David Lynch earlier on about Rio in particular, and the idea that, it seems to be that there is a path for him there to first team involvement. And perhaps occasionally we shouldn't be scared of promoting someone so young so quickly when they appear to be so talented. But, we have Ben Doak put in some very interesting preseason performances in previous years. What's your take on Rio and Trey and the best way to manage them? Do they seem to you lads who should be on the fringe of the first team squad for the majority of the season?
Yeah, it's trying not to blow our own trumpet a little bit, but how many times earlier, sort of towards the summer or early this summer, have we said the plan was always, for we understood it, they had massive hopes for Rio and Gamoa, and they didn't want to sort of block that pathway, as we said. And funnily enough, what's the terminology everyone's using? Rio and Gamoa's pathway right now. It was always something they looked at. I do think, being honest, there's a couple of things to this. It's pre-season, so you can never get too excited, of course. But pre-season, I think he's doing better than a lot of people, maybe even the Liverpool staff expected, and just almost, hold on, how many minutes are we giving this kid? Where do we see him? Like, can we put 16 here? All those types of discussions going on. But do you know what? It's better to have this discussions about holding him back a little bit, isn't it, than trying to develop something that's not really there. So that's a massive positive that way. Trey is, I feel for Trey Downey because I think he is such a talented youngster, but he's in just such a competitive area. That double pivot in midfield. I mean, look at the options we've got, like Szoboszlai, McAllister, Gravenberch, Curtis Jones as the squad rotational option. You've now got, I know not in the double pivot, but Florian Wirtz is an option there. Harvey Elliott, for God's sake, is moving on just because he's not, going to get a chance all those minutes. It's just a bit unfortunate where Trey Downey finds himself. I do think he will be around the first team picture and limited less minutes than Rio and Gamoa. But the word that we got, and we mentioned it last week, just because of how good they've become, I think those two are unloanable, aren't they? They're unloanable. You've got to control their development. Arne Slot's got to be having full handle on it. And it's really hard to say, but those two right now have got superstar potential. So we should be excited about them.
I think so. And an awful lot of people are reluctant to see Kevin there in the chat, reluctant to completely wipe our hands or wash our hands of Doak as well. So it is a very, very nice headache to have for Arne Slot, to be thinking about what to do with all these talented youngsters and how to best manage them. That's exactly the place that we'd like us to be in. Yeah. And the only other one that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, because there's been contrasting stories that I've heard, is Jayden Danns. We know that he picked up a bit of a knock, and we know that there was complications around that. Where are we with Jayden Danns in terms of what you're hearing from people about his status at the club? Because you quite often, via your various sources, you'll get a sort of a sideways reference as to how someone is perceived at the club. And I think he was very highly thought of by the Klopp regime. I'm wondering if it's the same with Arne.
Doesn't seem to be that way, to be honest. And again, if you think of the talent we've got in that area of the pitch and who might to be, to come in to get in Liverpool's forward line, it's just insane now, isn't it, to even be an option? It really is, in the best possible way, such a high standard. I think it was telling that they were trying to, they loaned him to Sunderland, didn't they? But just injury problems made that a bit of a nightmare where he didn't play at all and came back. All the expectation is, again, Jayden Danns does a loan to maybe a top-level championship club, see how he does. But, and again, there will be some Jayden Danns fans, and they've seen his goals and, bits of Carabao, FA Cup and all that. A lot of the noise that we're hearing is the expectation is it's hard to see a future long-term at Anfield. That doesn't mean he's a bad player. But, I mean, just look at the forward line that you've got. Salah, you've just bought Ekatike in for that money. You know, Gakpo on the left. Young Rio, the potential he's got to go in there. And, you know, who might be joining them as well at the same time. It's just Florian Wirtz even dovetailing possibly on the left, as people have mentioned. It's just unfortunate for Jadon Danns. The standard is so high. But in reality, we're quite happy with that at the same time, aren't we?
How could you not be happy with a situation like that? Let's address the elephant in the room, Dave, because we've kept people waiting long enough. They will want to get their Isak fix for what it's worth. And please, like we regularly say here, don't shoot the messenger. There's only certain amounts that we can wring from a comparatively dry story at this stage, but we'll try and get an angle or two for you here. And it's interesting, you know, I don't know how far you want to go into the Sesko thing because it is a story later on, but everything has this knock-on effect because we are, as you, I think, were the first to coin the idea of the term of being in like a housing chain. That's where we're at. And unless Newcastle get their shit together, realistically speaking, they're going to hang on to their asset. And they just don't seem to be able to do that. Now, there was talk last night about Isak's agent. I heard David Lynch shoot that down fairly dramatically and claim it was somebody else. And we've got now Eddie Howe, my favorite part of the show yesterday, dude. I did Daily Red for Dave yesterday. My favorite part was it being able to quote those Eddie Howe lines about this is Newcastle, and you know, doing the tough guy, you know, the toddler on growth hormones acting tough. Come on, man. It's a bit late to be posturing, but look at him. He's having a go. He's trying to hold the line, and you know he's a disciplinarian and all that. Sure. It's a complicated situation. Is there anything by way of a different angle? Can you put to bed those agent chit chat? Do you want to talk about Eddie Howe's stance? I don't know if you want to get into the details of what Newcastle aren't doing, which is what it's making our job all the harder.
Yeah, I think, like you say, it's what Newcastle aren't doing more than anything. And do you know what reminds me of this of? And I know you love a good movie reference, always a man of culture and everything. Do you remember there's that bit at the end of The Godfather 3 where Michael Corleone's daughter gets shot on the theatre steps and he like does that dramatic like pause where he's just breathless, and it's that iconic moment from Godfather 3. Almost that bit where he's like, that is almost how I feel about this whole Isak saga at the moment. And we were debating, are we putting it into a saga? But it is just because of who we need to get into bed with to make it happen, don't we? And we'll go, like you said, we'll go into a little bit with the Newcastle stuff. But I can't remember a transfer window where one club has been rejected so publicly by so many players, especially players in the same position. I mean, they've just, we know it's going to happen. We're hoping it's going to happen. We're pretty confident it's going to happen. But like any bad nightclub, it's one in, one out to happen, isn't it? And they just can't seem to get one player in. Maybe, just maybe, despite all the protestations, we are Newcastle United and all this, maybe Newcastle United should just think about targeting players that they've actually checked if they want to play for them and they've actually done some groundwork on, rather than appointing your nephew last minute and then just trying to see, do you want to play for us? Do you want that, like, and getting rejected left, right, and centre. It is just honestly amateur hour across the board. And unfortunately, despite how well run we are, and we've proven that all summer, there's zero doubt about that, we are in a housing chain with amateurs. And unfortunately, it's got that knock-on effect. And until Newcastle actually do some business, and it looks like we're going to have to wait even longer, so get ready for the Premier League update at the same time, we're kind of just in stasis, aren't we? We're ringing the solicitor every day going, any developments, any surveys done, anything coming up, that, and just waiting and waiting and waiting. But this is maybe a lesson. What happens when you get into bed with amateurs?
There's so many places I could take that last statement, but I'm going to leave it right there, hanging awkwardly in the air. See it? You see it right there? Hanging awkwardly. You know what happens? You know what happens immediately after that silent thing that you just did the impression of? A really horrible howl, and I hope that's not Liverpool fans in the wake of this saga, as we've deemed it. An interesting question from Kevin, and it came to my mind today when I was doing Daily Red, and yesterday actually. What happens if this doesn't work out? And Kevin says, I'll just pop it up on the screen there. What happens if we can't get Isak? Where do we pivot next? We can't go into the new season with just Ekitike as our only 9. It's an interesting point because the cover for that area was Luis Diaz, and he is now AWOL as well. So it is very interesting. And obviously we've got the tragic loss of our beloved Diogo as well. So it does really seem as if there's a glaring gap there, and we would need to pivot. For all the talk of Isak, I've heard very little talk about Liverpool having a sort of a secondary go-to option. Ekitike used to be that for us, you remember? But now it doesn't seem like anyone who's talking about these pivot options, they're more sort of manifesting ideas that they've had themselves than echoing anything that even relates to a scintilla of a story from anywhere. That's my take. Have you heard anything by way of what might be a reasonable pivot for Liverpool?
No, to be honest. And everyone is now just a little bit starting to speculate that what happens if this doesn't actually go through and Newcastle just completely balls up the transfer window so it has the knock-on impact on us? I mean, obviously, as we've said, we don't think you're there yet. We all got the expectation, but you start thinking of names, and Rodrigo's been pretty much ruled out by many, hasn't he? Because of the fee, the wages, almost like guess who knocked that tile down. Yes, there's been mention of young Fofana, but that's more as almost a fifth forward option, isn't it? Look like a young Rio having a few of those FSG signing type players around to come in, not as a starter realistically or wanting to play serious minutes. The Julian Alvarez link died a long time ago, much to our dismay, didn't it, realistically as well? So you are just a little bit like, it's still a minor percentage, just to be clear to everyone. But the longer and longer this rumbles, if, for instance, we're at the season opener against Bournemouth and Newcastle haven't got a striker replacement in, which we can kind of laugh about, really, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility with how much of a mess they're making of this window, then you will just have a serious question around what are we going to do here a little bit. But really important to say at the same time, I think we're about 2-3 weeks away before we really start to think like what's going on. But you just couldn't put anything past Newcastle right now, could you? Nothing at all.
If we did have to go with the current incumbents, there is a scenario, I suppose, where Cody Gakpo could cheat inside, right? That could be a thing. It wouldn't be to everyone's taste, but I guess it would be a way of moving forward. Anyway, they will work it out. Their brains are very much trained on this task. We'll move on to our next story, and we'll kind of come back obliquely to the Isak thing when we focus on Newcastle and their absolutely lamentable efforts to sign people in a little while when we talk about the Premier League. But let's stay with Liverpool. I think we're all in absolute agreement that with the latest knock to Joe Gomez and just seeing what a defense looks like when Virgil's sick, we need action in this area. Last week, you flagged up De Winter, Van Hecke. I've seen mention of Koulierakis. We just mentioned earlier on that Newcastle are also in for Guehi, who we've been linked with very strongly. And there was at least one other Italian lad who Dave Hendrick was mentioning, and I've seen a little compilation videos of him floating about as well. You might want to mention him too. You've got a few other little angles. I'm going to leave that to you to wrap up. But talk to us about the centre half department. What's real, what isn't, what's fanciful, what's speculation, if there are any genuine links that you can stand up for us.
Yeah, the Mark Gay one, it was such a hot file a while ago, wasn't it? And then just went like ice cold. And Ed Aarons, who gets a lot of Crystal Palace info, tweeted there today earlier that Crystal Palace yet to receive offers for him. And there's some crucial detail there, isn't there? Liverpool still thought to be his preferred option, but Newcastle could revive interest. Palace won 40 million quid. We said this last week. Liverpool Seymour was determined with Mark Gay. The numbers got to start with a 3. And I think we're both of the opinion, like 40 million in the current market with a dearth of centre halves for Mark Gay, who's English, so you help your homegrown quota as well. And his experience just seems a great deal because you're buying straight away a player who's worth more on your books, aren't you? And who, I think he's a lesser player, don't get me wrong, but can cover and potentially challenge Ibu there for the centre-half spot. It's almost like, that meme we like with the stick, like, go on, do something. You're almost prodding Edwards and Hughes to do this a little bit. I think everyone would have a massive boost if Mark Gay walked through the door quite quickly, and we'd all be like, great, that's a problem area, we think, sorted. Because that game last night, Trev, Konate was the only senior centre-half playing. Yes, VVD's ill and should return for the Community Shield, so it's nothing too much. But as you said, Joe Gomez, there's nothing really after that, is the bar? Endo and others move in position essentially at the same time. It does just really surprise me on this. Now, you mentioned a few names there. De Winter and Van Hecker. Yeah, chase this up a bit more. De Winter's agent's been into the UK, flown into Liverpool a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know if that just hasn't progressed or nothing's really gone with that, but his agent specifically has been to Liverpool, flown in. So Adam P and Justin Bieber, brother, or whatever he's called, start doing your homework on that, please, to produce some results. I'll set you some tasks there. And Van Hecker. The only thing about Van Hecker is he is liked by Slot. He's got 2 years on his deal. He's told Brighton he's not signing a new one. So what are Brighton doing? Understandably, shipping him everywhere, aren't they? I know his agents talk with Newcastle, Spurs, and other sides as well. I have no doubt, don't get me wrong, he would prefer to come to us, and we wouldn't mind that deal going through. But suggestions are the price tag's about 43 million quid. Brighton are wanting a bit of a bidding war, aren't they? And others getting involved. And you're dealing with Tony Bloom and Paul Barber, ruthless operators at the same time. So all those ingredients don't really help the mix. Another one they've also looked at, you mentioned Koulierakis. They've had a look at him, spoke to his agent. I've never heard of this boy, a bit like I never heard of Conor de Winter. He could have walked past me in the street. There's a young French centre-half called Jacquet. Not a clue, Trev. Could join us in the studio right now, and I generally wouldn't know who he is. Plays for Rennes, apparently. 20 years old, pretty decent in the air, not a bad passer. So he's another one they're looking at. As you mentioned, Leone, the Parma young centre-half, but seems to want to stay in Italy as, let's be honest, the inklings we're getting from that is Italians don't do well outside of Italy, do they? Especially not in the Premier League, as we know. So there seems to be a bit like we saw with other positions, which is promising, a lot of looking, a lot of things going on. But I think we just all like the trigger pulled a little bit on a centre-half quite soon, isn't it? I know people would want two at the same time as well, because there's only actually officially Ibu who's fit right now. Yes, BVD's got an illness and back soon, but if one of our senior centre-halves gets a knock, someone is playing out of position in the season opener, aren't they? Because Joe Gomez doesn't look like being back. And I like Joe Gomez. He seems a great guy. Everyone likes him. But I think if you get 20 games a season out of Joe Gomez this year, you're probably thinking we've done all right there, aren't we? In all honesty. So we need a centre-half in for me, almost more than all the Isak talk. And there's lots of shopping around like we did for many others earlier in the window. Maybe it might be after the Community Shield for Gay, and of course that Palace game on Sunday, who knows? But you would like one in before the season opener, wouldn't you, in all honesty?
You would, and I was saying again on one of the shows either yesterday or today that I found it very, I found quite jarring when I said I put out some harmless tweet about, you know that is it what's his name? Ant-Man, Paul, what's his name? Paul Rudd. Do you know that
Yeah,
that GIF? Look at us, you know that. Look at us. Who'd have thought it? That GIF. I did that, and it was just something along the lines of, "This is going to be Dickie Hughes and Mick Edwards when we get Isak and Gay in before the end of the window." And I got a lot of pushback about Mark Gray, and people were saying don't really want him at the club. And I honestly didn't know what the story was about, and I just accepted people. People were telling me he didn't wear the armband. I've looked it up since. So Mark Way is a very religious guy and
yeah,
a devout Christian, and he wrote "I love Jesus" on the rainbow armband, which he did wear, and he wrote "Jesus loves you" on the rainbow armband with a smiley face, which he did wear. So I don't know that that's as abhorrent as people were making out. It's not like
no.
it's not like this horrible act of desecration. I don't think. Um, anyway, look, it's odd waters to be wading into, but I just wanted to set the record straight because I don't like agreeing with things that are wrong, and I just bowed to people's superior knowledge on a topic I didn't know about. It turns out they were wrong. Our next story is Harvey Elliott, and Harvey Elliott, a bit like Darwin and a bit like some of the ones that have gone already, was already being linked with an exit before the season ended. It hasn't gotten any more likely that he's going to hang around despite an interesting showing and a goal yesterday. He, as you said, and I heard you acknowledge this on at least one of the shows earlier on, went to each of the stands. Now,
Yeah,
that's a quite deliberate thing in a kind of nothing friendly before the game, before the season. I think it's clear that he probably feels he's on his way out. West Ham had been the big link, but now since then, Spurs, in the wake of an injury to one of their more creative players, has been linked heavily. And we know that there's the Red Bull connection. And I wonder, is Klopp all working behind the scenes there in some way, shape, or form? Talk to us about Harvey Elliott and what the stories are about a potential exit for him, because Harvey's one of those, and it is a cynical way of looking at it. And if you love Harvey Elliott, congratulations, take a ticket behind me. We all love Harvey Elliott, but the
yeah.
likelihood is he's leaving. And if he's leaving, then we have to talk about the fee that we might get for him. What is that fee reported to be? And am I right in saying that Spurs and Red Bull Leipzig are the two most recently linked clubs?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of mentioned Spurs last week as a potential option, and their needs just accelerated big time, hasn't it? Because Son, as everyone knows, is set to depart the Premier League to move to Los Angeles, and James Maddison had what looked like a pretty serious injury, didn't he? He was on crutches. It was the same knee. He's re-injured as well there. So yeah, there's months, as Thomas Frank indicated there, that he's expected out. So in all honesty, it would be a great move for all parties, wouldn't it? Harvey Elliott, that type of club. Spurs again. People would look and say, well, the way Thomas Frank plays football, but I just think it would be a great move there, and their needs obvious. It could be good business for all parties. Red Bull Leipzig as well, like you mentioned, very interested in the player, and odds are that's set to be buoyed very shortly by serious funds from Benjamin Šeško and his sale, and also Xavi Simons. But again, you don't fancy they'll be as high a payers is the suggestion as Spurs, would they? And a Premier League club, they always look for frugal deals, as it were, the Red Bull chain. But again, it would be great move, on all parties. The one thing it's just worth mentioning is that one of my mates went to the game and he's actually sat, by the dugout entrance as they come out. And he said, like, Harvey did that and all. And he said it was quite clear, as a lot of people clocked, when Harvey hits the tunnel, there was like a little tear or two down his eye, that he was quite emotional. So I think we all know where this one is going. But listen, anywhere north of 40 million for Harvey Elliott, I know some people will say, 50 and more, but maybe just that Euro under 21 final moment has been and gone a little bit, hasn't it? People will also look at Liverpool and say, well, why am I going to pay top dollar? Because they're stacked with so many attacking options, and Florian Wirtz is there at the same time. We know he's not going to play that much. So fee-wise, I think anything north of 40 million, Liverpool will entertain.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been times over the course of that kid's career where, if you were to say that 40 million and in and around that amount of money would be available for him, people would have bit your hand off. Let's be honest. And I really want him to go and make a career for himself elsewhere. And this is the thing. Again, it was listening to someone recently on a show. You realize that it's not like he didn't live his dream at Liverpool. He played so many games. He was a beloved Klopp favourite in an exciting era. He was around the lifting of so many trophies and contributed to many of them. So it's not that much of a sad story. The main thing about Harvey is he loves the club so much that it's hard to see him being semi-forced out because he's not in favour. That's the only thing about it.